Tonight we're going to talk about Moses, all right? So we're out of Genesis now, okay? It took us 9 weeks. Yes, this is week 9. It took us 8 weeks to get through Genesis. Now we're into Exodus, where the story of Moses and God's liberation of his people from Egypt happens, okay? So what we're covering tonight is out of Genesis chapter 3 through chapter 4, about halfway through verse 18. So it starts with the background of this story. So who was it that brought the Israelites to Egypt? Joseph brought his family, his other 11 brothers, and father, and all their relatives that were with them, and they settled in an area of Egypt, and they lived there for 400 years. Okay, and during that 400 years, as just like in our own society, rulers come and rulers go. You know, we got a pharaoh would die, a new pharaoh would come into power, his sons, and after a while, all of a sudden you forget about what amazing things God does through someone for your nation, right? And so all the things that Joseph accomplished in his time as second in command of all of Egypt was forgotten. And the rulers all looked and they saw the numbers of Israelites that were being born. And over 400 years, they multiplied and multiplied to the point that one family that came in began to scare Egypt because they rivaled them in numbers. And so they decided we're going to put them under subjection. So they made them all slaves. And that didn't do a good enough job. So all of a sudden, one of the pharaohs decides, I am going to cull the herd, okay? And if we think about that in today's society, that's exactly what it would have been like. He made a choice of who he was going to cull, and he decided that all of the male children under a certain age would be killed. And so that happened. Every male child under a certain age was killed. And that happened to everyone except for one boy. And his mother had the idea to make a basket, to waterproof it, put the baby in the basket, and set it out on the Nile. Now, when I was a kid, I imagined this river, right? I imagined a river like the Missouri, a fast-moving river, or the Mississippi in certain areas. But the area that they would have placed him would have been one of the bayous, because the story talks about that was where the princesses of Egypt would come to bathe. So they would have had these tall bulrushes that made a secluded area, and it would have been still water. And so that's where they placed this basket and where it was found. And so I didn't know if, because you always hear that they put it in the Nile, but in my mind, the Nile is a moving river, and it's, either the first or second. My geography has eluded my mind today. Either the first or second longest in the world, and so to me that means it's a big deal, right? So we'll get to the background here of the story now. So Moses was this baby, in case you didn't catch that from the heading being Moses. So Pharaoh's daughter found Moses in this basket, and she took him to Pharaoh and asked to be able to raise him as her own. And every Bible scholar will tell you that they would have been able to look at that child and know exactly what nationality this child was. That it was not Egyptian, that it was an Israelite child. And So I think about that, and I think, so Pharaoh wanted all of them killed, but he either had such a love for his daughter to allow her to raise him, or God changed his heart for that instant, right? So he allowed him to do that. Moses grew up, right? He grew up in Pharaoh's home. He learned all about leadership, because he would have been a grandson of Pharaoh. So he would have potentially been in line to become Pharaoh if other people had died that were ahead of him. But as he grew, he started getting more of an affinity for his people, and did not like seeing what was happening to them, having them subjugated to that level and enslaved. And one day, he saw, I want to make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Nope, we're good. So one day he saw an Egyptian who was beating one of the slaves, one of the Israelite men. And anger came over him, and he ended up killing this Egyptian. And because of that, he feared for his life, because he killed an Egyptian, and that was punishable by death. And so he decided to hightail it out, and he went to a land called Midian. I was curious. Every time I hear about somebody leaving and going somewhere, I think, how far away was this? How long would it have taken him to go? Anybody ever wonder those things? So Midian is about 360 miles away from Cairo, and they're assuming Cairo would have been where the Pharaoh would have been, because that's the capital today, and a lot of times those things don't change that much. So it's about 360 miles. They assume that if he could make it 20 miles a day, then it would take him 18 days to walk that. So it was a hike, right? It was a hike. So through the desert, and there's question how much real desert it was. It could have been that there were areas of desert, but like if you think of Egypt at the time, it was an oasis. It was this lush territory, and for whatever reason, it's not so today, right? So, all right. So Moses may have thought that he would spend the rest of his life in Midian, right? He thinks, I totally blew any chance of being with my people. There's no way I can help liberate them now. If I return, I'm going to be killed because of my crimes. And so I now have to make my life here. And so that's what he did. He married a Midianite woman. And some people, they think about that, and they think, well, how did he go and marry somebody outside of his own nationality, of his own people, right? Because that's God's law. You don't do that, right? But when did God's law come? Not for like another 40 or 50 years, right? And so at this time, that wouldn't have been totally uncalled for or unheard of. So Exodus 2:24 says that God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and had compassion on their descendants, because for all this time they were crying out to God for him to liberate them. And so now in this session, we're going to hear about how God planned to rescue his people from slavery. And as we listen, there's a couple of things I want you to think about. First, put yourself in Moses' place and try and understand how he would have felt to encounter God in this way. Okay? I'm going to go a little bit past the end of where they leave the story, because this is something I keep forgetting about until I reread this passage. But so put yourself in his place. Try and think about how you would have felt in that encounter. And second, what would you have said to God? And then third, how much faith would you have had about God's plan? So think about those three a little bit, and we will continue with the story. All right. So one day, Moses was tending his father-in-law's flock near Mount Horeb. Now, what people sometimes don't realize, this is Mount Sinai also that we hear about. So when you hear about Horeb, Mount Sinai, it's the same place. Okay? And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a burning bush. The bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. And Moses was curious, so he went closer to see the bush. Now I want to pause here for a second. So Moses had some curiosity, didn't he? Right? What do you think caught that curiosity? Okay, so there was a bush on fire. That would have been the first thing I think that would have caught my attention is, oh, there's a bush on fire. And then I think I probably would have gone about my business, making sure, well, let's make sure that doesn't spread to another bush or something along those lines, right? And as he goes on, he look at this bush again, and oh, it's still on fire. Goes about tending his flocks, doing what he has to do. Turns around, he says, that bush is still on fire, and it's the same size fire, and it's not changing. It's not going down. It's not, it's not turning to coal. It's not turning to embers. It just keeps burning. So at that point, his wonder has been caused, right? I had some friends. They talked about miracles, and they talked about that signs and wonders are in miracles. And she says, if you don't wonder, then it's not a miracle. So you got to have wonder in order for there to be signs and wonder. So that's what caught his curiosity. So can you think of a time in your life where something has caught your curiosity or your attention, but you just kind of passed it off? I know I have. I know I have. And there are times that, if it was something that still sits in my mind that I think, I wonder what would have happened if I had listened to that curiosity and followed it through. Either for the good or for the bad. Some of them man, if I had caught a hold of that curiosity and followed it, it would have been a bad thing, right? We can probably all come up with those things. If I had only done that, I would be so in trouble right now, right? But then there's those things, man, I wonder if that was my burning bush. Yeah. Yep. But I wonder if that was my burning bush, and that was the thing that God caught my attention with, but I just ignored it and let it go. I mean, I think about those things, and as I go through life, when things catch my attention, now I start to wonder, is this something I'm supposed to follow up on or not? So that is just something that I think of. So, but Moses acted on it, right? He left his flock, he got up, and he went over to however far it was to this burning bush. So when he got closer, God spoke to him, and he told Moses, take off your sandals, because where you are standing is holy ground. Okay? And I was going to say we all know, but maybe we don't know, but wherever God is holy ground, right? One other thing is it says in Exodus, it says that the angel of the Lord appeared in the burning bush. Okay, anytime in the Old Testament, if you hear the angel of the Lord with a capital L, that is a pre-incarnate Jesus. So this would have been Jesus himself speaking to Moses through the burning bush. He told Moses, take off your sandals because you're standing on holy ground. Then God identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look upon God. So God said that he had seen the misery in Egypt and was going to bring them to the promised land, a precious land flowing with milk and honey. He was sending Moses to Pharaoh to bring his people out of Egypt. So let me ask you guys this question. Why milk and honey? It's delicious, right? Good stuff, goes down, stays down, right? But why milk and honey? Why not steak and lobster? I'm going to take you to the land of steak and lobster. Okay. Some of you may not know, but I'm from a heavily agricultural background, okay? Spent a huge part of my career in agriculture, grew up in a heavily agriculture area. So think about milk and honey, all right? What are the main things that it takes to produce milk and honey? Okay, cows and bees. So let's talk about cows. What do cows need? They need grass. Okay, back then it would have been grass, and they would have needed a lot of it. If your land is flowing in milk, that means you have lush pasture land, right? So to sustain enough cows for milk to flow out of that land, okay? And if you think about bees, what do bees need? They need flowers, okay? So you would have had orchards, you would have had flowering trees, flowering bushes, flowers. Yes, it means extremely fertile land because you're going to have an amazing amount of honey and you're going to have an amazing amount of milk. And that's something that when they heard, they understood that this means this land is a good place. Okay? So Moses didn't understand, and he asked, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" But God assured Moses that he would be with him and that Israel would worship at that very mountain. So Moses asked what he should tell the Israelites when they asked him who had sent him. And God said to tell them, "I am who I am." That is what you are to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." He also said, "Tell them that he was the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that they should remember him by that name for generation after generation." I missed that part. However many times I've read this story, I just think, they just always called him the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he actually told them, "This is how I want you to refer to me, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And so if you think about it, that is the God of their beginnings. And so God likes good beginnings, doesn't he? And he likes to take what was in the beginning and finish it all the way through. So God told Moses to assemble the elders of Israel and go with them to Pharaoh, asking for permission to take a 3-day journey into the desert for worship. Okay? Doesn't seem like too bad of an ask, does it? Just let us go for 3 days. We're going to go worship. You won't like our worship. It'll be detestable to you because we have to make sacrifices, all these things. But in 3 days, we'll come back. And Pharaoh, in the end, says no. And so a couple of times that ask is made, and he keeps saying no. And so because he said no to that, then all of a sudden it changed from let us go for 3 days to let us go. Okay? And I wonder how often do we say no to God for the small things to where he demands the big things? Right? All right. But God also told them that Pharaoh would refuse them because he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So he would do many powerful miracles to compel Pharaoh to let them go. He also promised that the Israelites would have favor among the Egyptian people and would leave with many gifts. And it's amazing because I feel like that statement is kind of downplayed. He had many gifts, okay? Amy talked, I don't remember if it was last Sunday or the Sunday before, that the Israelite people, when they were taking in the gifts to build the tabernacle, right, the first meeting place of God, that they finally had to say, hey, well, don't bring anything more. We have everything we need, okay? This was all the stuff that Egypt had given them. All the gold, all the jewels, all the silver, all the silk. This is what this stuff was. And so there was so much that the things to build, the gold lampstands, the gold bowls, covering the Ark of the Covenant in gold, they had more than enough based on what was given to them. And so I just think, they had a lot to carry when they left. So, all right, so Moses wondered if the people would believe him. So God told him to throw down his staff on the ground. It immediately turned into a snake, and Moses ran away from it. That's another thing I miss quite often, that Moses reacted like this, throw your stick down. Okay, it turned into a snake, and he jumps back and runs off from it. All right? So then God told him, go pick it up by the tail, and it turned back into his staff. Then God told him to put his hand inside his cloak and take it out. When he did, his hand turned leprous. The Bible actually says white like snow. I mean, it wasn't just a spot here and there. It was completely covered. So Moses put it back in and took it out again, and the leprosy was gone. God said to show his people these miraculous signs, and if they still didn't believe, he had one more thing to tell him. And what's interesting is if you read this in the New Living Translation, God's telling Moses, okay, first take your stick, put it down, it'll turn into a snake, pick it up by the tail, it'll turn back into your staff, and that should do it. But if it doesn't, then take your hand, put it inside your cloak, it'll turn into leprous, put it back in, it'll be unleprous. And that surely should take care of it. But if that doesn't do it, God's thinking, these are my people. I know what's going to happen over the next 40 years. There's just a chance they might not might not believe you. So, if they still don't believe, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground, and it will turn to blood. Whoops. Then Moses protested by saying he wasn't a good speaker. Okay? So, in that bit before, I'm kind of thinking God probably not only knew what his people were like, but he knew what Moses was like, right? And so he's thinking, he's hearing Moses' thoughts that, okay, I got the snake stick, but what if that doesn't work? Well, if that doesn't work, let's go ahead and, how many times do we argue with God, and before we get it out, all of a sudden he has his rebuttal? Has anybody ever experienced that? I've experienced that numerous times. I think I start thinking, but what if? Well, if that doesn't work, if that's not enough. So I wonder how much of that was him cutting off Moses' excuses. And then finally Moses, knowing that, okay, this line of excuses isn't going to do me any good, so now I'm going to switch. Man, I can't talk. I can't speak. I get in front of people. I stammer. I don't know what to say. I can't get the words out, which is interesting if you're debating with God that you think you're not a good speaker. So what does God do? The first thing he does is he gets angry at Moses. Okay? And what some people don't realize is this anger goes beyond this section of text until he actually starts traveling back to Egypt. And God is still so mad at Moses that on his way back, he goes to the woodshed with Moses to the point that he almost kills him. The Bible says that God wanted to kill Moses because his anger was so extreme with him over his lack of willingness to do what he said. And through a really weird thing that his wife does, he gets saved from his thrashing. And I think this is the time where Moses learns, you know what, if God says, you do. Right? And so I think that's how he moves on, and he gets in front of Pharaoh, and, I jumped ahead a second. So, God, in his anger, says, well, here, your brother is coming. He, I know, is a good speaker. So there's no excuse here. So he is going to be your mouth, but you're going to tell him what I tell you to tell him to tell Pharaoh. And that's what he's going to tell him. And so his brother comes, they head back, he tells his brother what they're going to do, and as they get back to Egypt, now that is the process that happens. But I want to go back to this thing that God, we don't think about what his anger is truly like. We think about his disappointment in us because we live under this dispensation of grace. Because Jesus was here, his grace is sufficient for us, right? But what we fail to realize is that God's anger and God's wrath is still there. And it is stayed by the grace that Jesus has given us. And so one of the questions that it asks is, if you were at that burning bush, what would you say to God? Anybody have something that they think that they would end up saying to God? Okay, be speechless. Yeah, yep. I don't know what to say because I can't say it now. So how am I going to say it later, right? Yeah. What did I do wrong, or what did I do right to deserve this? Yeah. And I think that that in the end is anytime God asks anybody to do something for him, I think that is the first thought that comes to everyone's mind is, who am I that you would ask me of this? I mean, that's the question that Moses asked. Who am I that I'm supposed to go and free my people? Right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's yes. That comment that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. If we think about that in just the natural, anytime I think of a spiritual concept, I try to think of a natural equivalent to help us understand of how that is. So if you think about some boss trying to hire somebody in to do a job for their company, okay? And they have these applicants that come in, and they have these people that have done this for years, and they come in, they apply, and they interview, and they think, well, yeah, they can definitely do the job. And then they have the applicant that comes in that they can see they have the skills, they have the understanding, they have the knowledge, but they're moldable. I can make them into what I want them to be for my purpose. Okay? That's how God does this, and that's partly why he doesn't call the qualified. Because if he calls the qualified, they're going to try and do it under their own power, under their own understanding, I've done it this way for 25 years, and it's worked out fine this whole time, so I'm going to keep doing it that way. And the whole time God's saying, no, it's not going to work that way this time, right? But now if he bring somebody that he knows I can pour into them the understanding. I can pour into them the knowledge. I can pour into them exactly what to say. I can give them the guidelines of what to do, and if they will just do it that way, it's going to work out splendidly. And that's what God sees when he calls people. So, all right. And so this was another, after all his excuses, and God gives him the final answer to his excuses, and he realizes, all right, there's nothing else that I can do to get myself out of this mess. So I think this is the next chance he has to get out of this mess, is he goes to Jethro, his father-in-law, tells him what, I'm going to go back to Egypt. And I think he probably expected his father-in-law to say, what? You're not taking my daughter and my grandchildren to Egypt. You're staying right here. You're tending my flocks. I've cared for you all these years. You owe me, right? But that's not what he does. He knows that this is God's calling on his life. And there are times through the story that you see Jethro come back with extreme wisdom from God. And so I think he sees that, no, this is God's purpose and God's plan for you. And he blesses him to go. I mean, has anybody remember hearing that in the story? That Jethro blesses him and says, go do this thing. So, anyway, any thoughts before we go into any of the other questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the number of missionaries that have followed God's calling with complete, utter disbelief that they can do any of this. I don't know anybody. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm. Jethro is a good father-in-law figure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I want to go back and see my family. They might be dead. I don't know. I'll paint this really rosy picture for you, Jethro. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. He is, and you know, once you're in a section where you see this habit of a person, I think sometimes we dismiss that habit. Okay, we think, okay, he questioned him 2 or 3 times, and then that was just it, right? We think about Gideon, that he questioned God twice, right? Okay, well, we'll make the fleece wet and everything dry. Make everything wet and the fleece dry, because that's harder to do. So, but after 2 times, he's like, all right, that's enough. I don't need to go any further, right? But Moses, we could see he kept going. It does make me wonder, then, what happened along the way that he made God so angry at him that he was ready to take his life. So. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And every once in a while, we have to put the fear of daddy in our kids, right? And people don't. I think people today they look at that as a bad thing, but there is a healthy fear that we need to develop and understand. That when we're face to face with a situation that there is no win, then you better understand that, okay, God is God and I am not, right? Mhm. Yep. Yep. So, all right, there's just a couple of minutes. What had God promised Abraham and Jacob about the land that they would live in? Flowing with milk and honey, okay? And was the current circumstances that the Israelite people lived in like that? Not at all, right? And probably as much of one as the other two, right? And how did Moses feel about being sent back to Egypt? Okay, he was afraid. Okay, and realize Moses is 80 years old at this time. Okay, he lived in Egypt for 40 years. At the age of 40, he went to Midian. He lived there for 40 years. And then, at the age of 80, he went back to Egypt, and he led his people for 40 years, maybe 43, right? Because there was a little bit of time before they did the golden calf. But so at 80 years old, I can see him having so many questions. That I am 80 years old. Jethro's going to die soon. Somebody's got to take care of his stuff. Okay, all those things. I think about the rich young ruler, right? When he came to Jesus, what do I have to do to follow you? What do I have to do to get to heaven? And he says, well, just live by the law, obey all the law. Well, I do that. I do that to the T every day. Okay, go sell everything and come follow me. And that was where he couldn't get past, right? So I think all of these things are all rattling around in Moses' head at that time. So, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. What Bill said is that maybe God knows all of our Achilles heel, right? All of the things that cause us to struggle with doubt, with disobedience, all of the things, and so that's the area that he goes to say, one of his disciples he said, "Come with me." He says, "Oh, but I have to go bury my father." Let the dead bury the dead. You come follow me now, right? So yeah, he deals with those things to try and get us past them, so that we can be successful in his calling for us. I was at a conference once, and I think it was with Creflo Dollar, but it's longer ago than I want to admit now. And and we were sitting there, and he was talking about it was actually a couples type conference, and so he was talking about allowing God to do the work in you that He wants to do, so that you're ready when the person that He puts in your life is made present. And so he said, God wants us to be all that we can be. But the problem is some of us are just Al. Not all. We're just Al. He's working on adding that other L so that we are where he wants us to be. So anyway, so that's almost to the end of our time tonight. We'll have a little bit of time for prayer. Does anybody have anything that they wish to pray specifically?